Good morning and welcome to Cheche, the show where opinion counts. Live on Citizen TV, I'm your host, Udwa Kamimo. Now, Kenya is in the throes of a depressingly familiar pattern of insecurity. One way the government plans to address this is through a public safety and security project. You'll have seen President Uhuru Kenyatta in television ads referring to CCTV in public spaces. It's all part of the same project, and the tender for the installation of that system went to the country's largest mobile network, Safaricom. Well, Bob Collymore is the Chief Executive Officer of Safaricom, and he's our guest on Cheche this morning. As always, we've got Mtegin Jao of Royal Media Services and David McCarley in the studio as the Cheche panel. Good morning and welcome to Cheche. It's great to have you here with us. Bob, you've got a huge announcement today, and so we had to rearrange things somewhat to accommodate you. But in order to understand the security tender, first help us understand your success and why you were the first port of call for the government.
You had to lead in with a security question. I think the reason, I mean, you need to ask the government to give you that answer, but from our perspective, it's because, number one, we have the capability, because what we're doing is we're building a communication network. I mean, a lot of people say, you know, you're not in the security business, what are you doing this for? This is not a security issue, this is a network issue. So we're effectively building a parallel network which is dedicated to the police. That's the first reason. The second reason is because, you know, government is not exactly flush with cash. And so what we were asked to do is to build this at our cost, and then government would pay for it over a period of 5 or 6 years. And the upfront cost of that is, you know, approaching 15 billion shillings. So there's not many people who can afford 15 billion shillings up front.
Okay, the government argues that it came to you first with no open tendering because you're the largest mobile network, most successful, and so you have a wider base and wider reach. Tell us how you got to that point where the government comes straight to Safaricom and not to anybody else?
Well, I think, again, that's another question which really is best addressed to government rather than to us.
But how did they communicate with you then?
Oh, they wrote a letter inviting us to do a single-sourced tender. I mean, there's a lot of debate about whether this is a single-sourced or a restricted tender, but effectively they wrote to us and asked us to tender.
At what interest are you going to, is the government going to repay the cost of setting out the infrastructure?
So the cost of capital, in other words, you know, if you spend 100 shillings today and you're not going to get it back until 5 years' time, that's what's called the cost of capital. So the cost of capital is 11.5%.
So the 4.5 or so is actually what is the interest that, or the profit for Safaricom over the investment?
No, there's no profit in it. So
actually, take us through the numbers because there have been several figures bandied about. We've heard several locations. You're rolling out in Nairobi and Mombasa. You even put out a statement clarifying the position. So let's clarify it here for our viewers.
Okay. So the total cost is 14.9 billion shillings. Which is everything rolled up, including the 11.5% cost of capital. And that 14.9 billion shillings, which we will pay for upfront, will be recovered over years 2 to 6. So the first year, government pays nothing. And obviously, if you don't build a proper network and it doesn't work very well, then government pays nothing. We're building 80 base stations, and a base station is a cell site, effectively. In Mombasa and Nairobi. The question that was asked to me in Parliament was, you know, what would be the cost if government rolled it out to the entire country? And at the point when government decides to do that, the total cost, including the 14.9, will be roughly 21 billion, because the bulk of the cost is in setting it up in the first place and setting it up in Nairobi. So as you add Kisumu and Eldoret and everywhere else, it's a marginal incremental cost. So it's about building the base station, plus it's about installation of the cameras. I think there are 1,800 cameras. And it's about building a command and control center for the police.
What is the business case for it, for Safaricom? I mean, okay, after you establish the infrastructure, are you going to be making money off that infrastructure and the use by the government, or you hand over the infrastructure to government to operate on its own?
So the business case is simple for us. You know, we live in a country where we have some security challenges. And if those security challenges continue, then we can't have a successful business. And as far as we're concerned, if we can do it at cost, which is what we were requested to do, if we can do it at cost and we can have a competent system there, then our business will thrive in the long term. If we try to do this at a profit, and we try to make money out of this, government is not going to be able to afford it, and then we're going to have to make, cut corners and
But you do benefit in some way, though, through spectrum, don't you? Because you are allocated extra bandwidth for the building of this system, which you retain.
Yeah, so let me explain the spectrum thing, because again, there's been a lot of confusion there. The cost is 14.9 billion, and we've said, and government has said, well, we don't really have cash to do this. And we said, well, you could lay off some of that cost by selling us the spectrum. So, we estimate the market value of the spectrum to be about $75 million, which is about 6 point something billion shillings. And we said to the government, if you make that available to us, if we can buy that, then you can reduce the cost. If you don't, then of course, you've still got the 14.9. But the spectrum would be available at market rates anyway. So whichever way you look at it, we'll be able to bid for the spectrum when it becomes commercially available.
There was issue raised about security. When you set up the bases, who mans them, and how is your involvement and your staff in terms vis-a-vis the security? Because you guys are not policemen.
Okay, and again, that's another good question. So when we use the word man, we need to describe what we mean by man.
Yeah.
So in terms of running the network itself, much the same as running the network that you're using today, that's what we'll do. The people who will be using the walkie-talkies, I mean, it's not quite walkie-talkies, they're quite sophisticated, but the people who will be using it will be the police. The people who will be manning the command and control center will be the police. What we would be doing is making sure the network continues to work, which is what we do today for 21 million customers.
So is there any threat to security? Your people knowing what they shouldn't know?
No, because my people aren't going to know any more than they know now about the network that we're running for the 21 million customers. So we don't have access to what's going on.
We're getting into details. I'll come back to it because it's a communications and surveillance system that you're supposed to be providing. Now, you've told us that you're building a network. You're giving the security agencies networking capacity. How exactly does that work, given that Mutegi's just referred to walkie-talkies?
So if you imagine the mobile phone that you've just taken away from me, if you imagine that mobile phone, the police will have something like that, which is capable of doing a number of things. It's not just the walkie-talkie. So they will speak in it, of course. It has video capability. So if you imagine, let us take ourselves back to Westgate. If a policeman is in Westgate, it gives the command and control center visibility of what's happening in there, because the policeman can use it. Now, even if the policeman is down, the command and control center can, which is the police, will be able to remotely switch that phone on, and will be able to see what's happening there. And indeed, all of the other police on that network will be able to see what's happening there. That's not a Safaricom thing. What we're doing is we're just running an LTE, which is a long-term evolution network, similar to the one you have, but actually much more secure.
Okay. So the question then about people, your personnel, goes into data protection, and we don't have that as such in Kenya. There are also concerns that because Safaricom has foreign ownership, that the data, whatever it is you're setting up, could be compromised rather. There are just too many variables within the system.
So let's break that down a little bit, because there are about 2 or 3 things you've mentioned. The first thing is the foreign ownership. So Safaricom has 60% local ownership. The government owns 35%. 25% is sitting with Kenyan shareholders, actually around 600,000 of those. And then 40% is owned by Vodafone. So Vodafone doesn't have management control of this company. It has an independent board chaired by a Kenyan independent chairman. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you said that Kenya doesn't have the protection. Actually, Kenya has a lot more protection, because there's no ability to intercept. There's no right to intercept. The security services cannot lawfully intercept any information, and we can't do that either. Whereas in other countries, if you take the UK, the UK has GCHQ, and there's lawful interception that happens, whereas here, lawful interception cannot happen. Now, the next question, which you probably going to ask me, is this issue of lawful interception.
Indeed. because you do need some sort of regulation, don't you? Part of the problem with our mobile telephony, you, Safaricom, and other operators are accused of selling data, you know, hawking it to the highest bidder.
Which is not true. Which is not true. I don't think we do it, and I don't think any of my counterparts hawk data. The information that we have access to is we can tell you where you are, because the cell site will tell you where you are, and we can tell you who you've called. But we don't know what you said on that call. We don't have the ability to either intercept your voice or your data. Having said that, you know, there are commercially available around the world ways of intercepting communication, but you know that is not lawful, and you know the technology is such that it's not foolproof. But it's nothing to do with Safaricom, and it's nothing to do with the law enforcement agencies, because they can't do that either.
Well, what is the best practices with regard to this kind of establishments? There's been the argument, I mean, where else is this being done? Where else is this Kenyan model being borrowed from? Do other countries do this kind of thing? The fears being expressed about security data or information being controlled in an infrastructure set up by a private company. Those fears, I'm sure you've come across them on your lists, Kiktanet and so on, people raising all those questions.
Yes, so this kind of system is invariably built by a private company, because that's not what governments do, right?
Yes.
So this system is a system which would be run in London, in New York. We know that the particular hardware that we are deploying has been deployed in Venezuela, has been deployed in a number of places in China. I think we have about 21 countries that it's been done. The reason why people get themselves very upset about this is because they think Safaricom is running a security service.
Yes.
Right? And we're not. We're running a network. In the same way that we run, as I said earlier, the network for the largest network in the region, 21 million people, we have no access to the information. We don't check to see what you're saying. Actually, incidentally, the police today uses our network. So it's no more, no less secure. In fact, it is more secure because we're now using...
You're saying you have no access to data or voice transmitted by your network? I thought that is not the case, because, I mean, intelligence and police people have snooped into these conversations and our messages.
Not through our network, huh? As I said earlier, around the world you can find commercially available bits of kits, which private investigators use, for example. So the police does not intercept our network. I can tell you that because I run the network. Right. And the police has never come to us, nor indeed national security services.
Yes.
They've never come to us and asked us to intercept. But in any case, we don't have the capability of doing that.
But there is some information to give them. If policemen came through court,
of course,
there's certain information to give them,
which is the call data records, right? So if the police comes with a court order, which they do, they frequently do, almost every day, they come to us and they say, could you give us the call data records for this customer? And they come with a court order, because they have to come with a court order, then we give it to them.
Only call data or even text data?
Well, we'll tell you who they've texted, but we don't know what's in the text. So we can tell you where the
substance of the text cannot be extracted.
It can't be extracted.
Okay. No. So Parliament then challenged government awarding you this tender on various issues. First of all, the method, the single sourcing, procurement, but also challenged you on your quality of service. Saying that even though you were the biggest and most profitable network operator, the service you rendered wasn't necessarily up to par. What was your response to that?
I'm sure the guys give me guys and girls give me a tough time, and to a degree we deserved it, because I have to say that the network right now is not as good as it should be. We're putting a lot of effort in trying to fix that, and it goes through phases, right? So I can put my hands up and say our drop call rates today in Nairobi is not good. However,
and why is that?
Congestion, which is because we don't have enough spectrum. Because if you look at the density of calls in some of our urban districts, particularly Nairobi, you'll see that it matches Mumbai or it matches Heathrow. That's the reason why we need to get more spectrum to make that work. Because, we're using the same amount of spectrum. And the viewers are going to struggle to understand what spectrum is. But if you imagine it to be a pipe, So we have the same size pipe as all of our other networks, despite having 10 times as much customers. And so we're saying, and discussing very positively with the regulator, we're saying we just need to buy a slightly bigger pipe. Right? So we're trying to fix that. But the answer to the parliamentarians on this particular issue is that our network is servicing 21 million customers. This unique network for the police will be servicing 50,000 at full scale. So it's going to be easier. And in any case, the spectrum which is being allocated for that particular use is much, much more efficient than the spectrum that we're using to
Which
run
is 15 years
commercial
old.
service.
15 years old.
Yes.
So you've just had your license renewed for another 10 years. And there's a bit of a stalemate because of the quality of service issues. So in renewing your license, do we expect better quality of service from Safaricom? Did you get the bandwidth that you requested?
No, we haven't. And that's why we have suggested to government that if we have this 800 spectrum, this LTE spectrum, that will help. That's independent of the license, incidentally. And we're also looking at some other options of trying to acquire some additional spectrum. U-Mobile is one of those.
So why is the spectrum a problem? Is it limited? Is it like water that you can't use?
It's worse than water. It is limited, and actually you guys, in the broadcasters are currently occupying that 800 band, and the whole digital migration story is about moving you off the 800 band to free it up for the telecommunications suppliers and putting you on a higher frequency. But it's a limited resource which government has, and our view always is that you should charge per use, and you can't. In fact, the two of you ask for spectrum, and you're using it more efficiently, and he isn't, and then it should be taken away from him and given to you. I mean, not given to you, but sold to you.
All right, we'll take a break now. Stay with us here on Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV. We'll be back with Bob Collymore, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Safaricom, after this break. In the meantime, you can send your questions for him. The SMS number is 22422, or you can tweet. The handle is @Cheche_TV.